Hello and welcome to Projector, and on this episode, Jessie Buckley steps on stage as our Wild Rose. Rosalind Harlan, played by Jessie Buckley, has just been released from prison and is determined to get her life back on track so she can pursue her ambition of being a country music star and get out of Glasgow and go to Nashville. However, her mother Marion, played by Julie Walters, who has been taking care of Rose's two children during her sentence, is insistent that she put her family first over her dreams and take responsibility. When Rose gets a clean job working for Susanna, played by Sophie Okonedo, she soon learns of and supports Rose's talent, potentially giving Rose the break she needs, but Rose must soon decide between her aspirations and doing what's right for her kids. Wild Rose is written by Nicole Taylor, who is making her film debut with this script after writing a host of TV projects, and apparently she drew a lot of the inspiration for this movie from herself. She's a big fan of country music, and a lot of the dynamic between Rose and her mother comes from the actual relationship that she had with her own mother. And the film is directed by Tom Harper, who's probably best known for helming The Angel of Death, the sequel to The Woman in Black, but aside from that, mostly television. In particular, the BBC adaptation of War and Peace recently that co-starred Jessie Buckley, and Harper wouldn't agree to direct this project unless Buckley was cast in the leading role because he was sure that she was a perfect fit for it, and he was very much correct. Now repeat that name after me. Jessie Buckley, Jessie Buckley, Jessie Buckley. Trust me, you'll be saying that name a lot more in the future. Buckley first came to people's attention on the BBC talent show I'll Do Anything, where she was ultimately the runner-up, but she first appeared on my radar in the movie Beast last year, which is this very strange little movie. It's this kind of warped modern-day fairy tale, for lack of a better description, and she was the lead role, playing this very introverted character that was marked by periods of intensity, and under the surface was undergoing this dark psychological transformation, and Buckley threw herself into that role. It was very unguarded and daring, and immediately let you know that she was going to go on for much bigger things. And she's only got a handful of film credits at the moment, but between this and Wild Rose, where she plays a totally different character, I know that Buckley is going to be a star. Buckley's performance as Rose is almost a total transformation if you saw her in Beast. Not only is the Irish actor performing in a Scottish accent a really good one, but also she's playing a character that's very rambunctious and uninhibited, at times extremely unexpected, only occasionally marked by self-doubt and regret. When we first meet Rose at the beginning of this film, she's trying to get her life back on track. She's going to continue her aspirations of becoming a country star, and don't you dare add the and western part on top of that, while also reconnecting with her two children. And apparently that relationship, from what we can gather in the film, was already quite fragile and maybe somewhat neglectful even before she went into prison. So there's obviously a lot to work on. She's been rehabilitated in the eyes of the law, but there's still a lot of personal rehabilitation that needs to be done. She may have kicked her drug habit, but she's still got a little bit of alcoholism. There's still a bit of a drinking problem, which often exacerbates her problems, particularly with her bad behaviour. And so in this film, a lot of Rose's problems come from the fact that she desperately wants to get out of Glasgow. She wants to be out of Scotland. And this can be particularly seen in the way that she likes to think of herself as being an American born in the wrong country. And this is further reinforced by the clothing choices in the costume design. There is a lot of instances in this movie where Rose is actually wearing an American flag as part of her clothing, which reiterates the fact that she doesn't see herself as being Scottish. She sees herself as an American. She wants to go to Nashville because she figures that's her best shot at being discovered in the home of the country music scene, as opposed to Scotland, where it's virtually non-existent. And the reason that she loves country so much is because, in her words, it's about three chords and the truth, a credo that she even has tattooed on the side of her arm. But she finds that emotional honesty very difficult. When Susanna discovers her talent, Rose lies to her. Rose presents this image of herself as being this unattached 20-something when in reality she has 2 kids to care for, because she knows that Susanna would view her very differently if she knew the truth. And therein lies the tension of this movie, in that Rose often abandons her children in pursuit of her singing career, leaving them with her mother or with her neighbours or friends when she does practices or auditions. And so we as audience members, we're rooting for her to succeed, but we also know that she's quite a selfish character and she can be quite difficult at times. But luckily, Buckley is such a likeable performer that you're always in Rose's corner. You're always hoping that she'll find some way of managing to resolve both sides of her life satisfactorily. And it also helps that Buckley is a very talented singer. She's a singer and an actor, and the performance sequences are incredible. Apparently she wasn't that much of a fan of country music until she started doing the research for this movie, and boy does that passion show, be it in covers or in the final song of the movie, There's No Place Like Home, which of course carries all the Wizard of Oz references that you would expect. And Buckley really takes it to another level with her performances. I think she imbues the vocals with such energy, but also such emotion. So much of this film's heft comes from what Buckley adds to each of these songs. And so you listen to her and you know that Rose is going to be a star, but the only way that she can do that is if she embraces all parts of herself. But Buckley isn't the only brilliant performance. Julie Walters is also fantastic. That almost feels like it goes without saying. Julie Walters is one of the most reliable, dependable faces in British cinema. You see Julie Walters in a movie and you know that she's going to be great. She's pretty much a national treasure. She could almost be described as the nation's mum by this point. And in this film, she doesn't have a very big role. She pops up sporadically over the course of it, but she almost serves as its conscience. She plays Rose's mother, who is very sacrificing. She was a single mother herself, and she's worked the same job day in, day out for decades, always trying to support her child. You know that that's hardened her over the course of the years, but nevertheless, she's giving out a lot of tough love, and it does genuinely come from love. She genuinely wants the best for Rose and her children, and so yes, she does get into a lot of arguments with Rose, but it's to try and remind her where her responsibilities should be, and the choices that she made shape how she responds to a lot of what Rose is doing, which is the exact opposite in a lot of ways. And Walters is great. It's one of those supporting performances that ascends Buckley up even further, and a lot of it is simply born out of frustration. She simply wants Rose to get her act together. She is tired of being the one that's had to pick up the pieces over and over again, and she doesn't want Rose to fall into the same cycle that she did before. And over the course of the film, she realises that maybe her position is a little bit too tough, a little bit too unforgiving, and she does learn to yield somewhat. I think the real sign of how great Walters is as a performer is in the very final scene that she has in this film, where she doesn't have any dialogue, but she doesn't need to. The reaction shots that she has, there's so much on her face playing out at that time. You could almost write a book about it, frankly. And that is the definition of a truly great performance. I have heard a lot of people comparing this to the recent version of A Star Is Born, which I don't think is all that accurate. Aside from the surface level one of, oh, they're both about aspiring country singers, that's about it. Even in Cooper's grittier incarnation, A Star Is Born is still a fairy tale, albeit one tinged by tragedy, but it is a fairy tale for the most part. Wild Rose is very much about the hard, difficult road of chasing stardom and just how unforgiving it can be. It offers Rose a lot of opportunities, but it takes them away with the other hand. So a good example of this is the sequence where she goes down to London London, and she's racing to the BBC to meet Bob Harris, the radio presenter who plays himself here. And I am aware of the irony of a film for production that has a character racing to go to the BBC. But nevertheless, in any other movie, this will be the climax. This will be Rose's big break for stardom. She would be discovered at this moment. Instead, Harris listens to her, respects her talent, but knows that she has some way to go yet. Rose's journey continues from there. And that's a good example of how this movie diffuses a lot of the fairy tale or celebrity trappings that you would associate with this kind of movie. Even on the journey down to London, she ends up losing control of herself and she ends up getting robbed in the process of her travels. And so that just reminds you of how much the movie wants to keep you rooted in realism. It always has one foot firmly placed in that. It has more in common with kitchen sink dramas more than anything else. And it doesn't pull its punches. It can be a tough watch in places, bordering on bleak before we get to the uplift. And in terms of the story, it can be a little bit shaky in places, especially going out of the second act and into the third act where Rose is at her lowest as a character. I thought the movie was wrapping up at that point, actually. I thought it was heading towards one particular kind of resolution, and I don't think I would have agreed with that. If it ended the way that I thought it would have had a fairly troubling message given the themes of the film, but luckily it diverts down a different path with Rose's trip to Nashville. And I think that Taylor has said that she had trouble writing the end to this story that she only figured out with her own trip to Nashville. You can sort of see that on screen. It does feel like a sudden abrupt change in the story, but luckily it's still rooted in the realism that they've set up in the rest of the movie, and it does work. I think it works for the character and her arc, and it gets her to where she needs to be. If anything, I actually think the ending's a little bit rushed. It seems to skip a key beat. There's a time jump involved in the ending, and I wouldn't have minded seeing a couple more scenes, just seeing the character progress a little bit more from where she was at one point, and then suddenly seeing her at the very end of the movie. I think that there needs to be a little bit more material there. It feels just like a very abrupt jump to a certain extent in the narrative that distracted me, despite the fact that the final scene works beautifully on an emotional level. I think that the final scene of the movie is really fantastic, even if that time jump was a little bit of an issue for me. I'd recommend Wild Rose. It's a good little movie with two great performances. Jessie Buckley shows just how fantastic she is, and Julie Walters is solid support. While I did have some issues with the writing, especially the fact that I think the tone needed a little bit more levity in certain spots, the performances are so good that it honestly doesn't matter. The drama is very compelling here. This is a solid example of female-led filmmaking. Aside from the male director, almost the entirety of the principal cast is women, and of course it's written by Nicole Taylor, who I think is going to go on to do even better things as she continues down this path. And honestly, Wild Rose hits a lot of the high notes that it needs to. Wild Rose is another example of Jessie Buckley's rising star, with another terrific lead performance that is by turns spirited and reckless, but also self-doubting and destructive. And while the character can sometimes be selfish, Buckley makes sure you're always rooting for her. Aside from her acting, Buckley is also a talented singer and shines in the musical numbers, covering country hits in a way that makes you sure that Rose is going to be a star. But Buckley is matched by Julie Walters, who gives one of the best performances of her career as Rose's long-suffering and sacrificing mother that loves her daughter and grandchildren dearly. While this is about trying to find fame, this is no fairy tale and has a genuine toughness to it, although sometimes that can make it a hard, downbeat watch in places, even if the film's final section perhaps tries to rectify that a little too abruptly. Nevertheless, despite its rough edges, this is well worth seeing for those two exceptional performances. If you like this review, then you can sing your heart out over at my Patreon, where you can see my reviews early among other perks, including access to my Discord server. But until next time, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out.